Good evening. Today is Tuesday, March 14th, 2023. We don't stand.
Oh, I was all ready to pledge away.
Study session, public, I threw me off. Public comments on study session related items. Seeing none, we will start with the discussion on the sewer backup policy for city manager and DPW.
Thank you, Mayor. So first off, we drafted a general policy regarding sewer backups. I'd like to invite Jeff McCool up to kind of walk through these items.
So most of the items in this document are the procedures that we use on a weekly basis. And I won't read it verbatim, but essentially whenever we're notified of a backup, we assign an employee to respond to the situation. That's not just during work hours, that's after hours, doesn't matter what time of day, we'll call somebody in to verify that. The second item is once that employee comes to the location, they will look into the city sewer main and typically look at a manhole upstream and one downstream and make sure that the city has proper flow through that main. That's our best way of investigating whether or not there's something wrong or a blockage within the city sewer or not. If they do find a backup, which is step number 3, they're to clear that blockage immediately. And then once that blockage is cleared, then they make attempts make an attempt to speak with the customer and or their contractor. Sometimes people leave and aren't there. Sometimes a contractor's on site, but whoever it is, and let them know of that information. One thing that we're proposing, and I don't know if you have a copy of that up but we want to give them some correspondence right at that time, whether or not they have a blockage or not. That kind of explains the city's responsibility for the main and the customer's responsibility for the sewer lateral. And then if the city did have a blockage and they have an insurance claim, there's information on who they can contact to proceed with that claim. And then if the issue is in their private lateral, it makes some suggestions to contact a contractor, lets them know that if they have to excavate within the right of way that impacts city infrastructure, then there's the procedure for the road breakage and policy. So number 4 is if the sewer main is flowing normal, again, they'll make that contact, give the same correspondence to that customer, and then provide any information. Step number 5 is something that we do now as well. We have a log book that we record every time we get one of these calls, who responded to it, what they did, what they inspected, what they found, and then we're going to add to that form a little checkbox to make sure that draft correspondence or that the correspondence was given to them. Step number 6, if the customer needs to do some excavation within the right-of-way, the customer needs to submit the utility connection and road breakage form, make that deposit at the city hall, and so again, that's something that we do now. We place all those deposited monies into an escrow account. So that's step 7. Step 8 is if the infrastructure is fully restored. So typically when they fully restore it, they will call us or call City Hall and ask for a refund. We go out within a day, we inspect it, and then note any deficiencies. If they have completely restored it, then we contact the clerk's office and have that refunded completely. Step number 9 is in the event that they have not restored the whole thing, and per the city ordinance, the city will take actions to make those repairs, and then should the cost of the work exceed the deposit, then the customer would be invoiced and a letter would be sent accompanying the invoice. So like we had recently, invoices went out, but the invoices don't give a whole lot of information. So I've drafted a sample letter that we can send that goes with that invoice and explains what the city had to do to complete the repairs. And then if it's still under the deposit amount, it'll show the calculation for that deduction, and then they'll receive a refund. If the correction is over the deposited amount, then they'll receive a bill and an invoice for the balance of that. And then step 10 is something that we normally do, but haven't updated it in a number of years, is looking at the deposit amount on an annual basis as part of our budget process. And we've seen a huge increase in the asphalt prices. So that's really one of the most expensive part of it. And of course, the contractors' prices go up as well. But as far as the infrastructure portion of that goes, we can look back at the following 2 years and kind of see where that trend is on those repairs, and so we can adjust the deposit. Because it makes no sense to put down $1,000 if most of the repairs are, or the paving or something is going to be $2,000 or maybe even more than that. So.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
This is all brand new steps in between here, correct? Because I'm seeing recent dates on this documentation.
Excuse me?
These are all new steps. This is a draft, correct, of a new policy.
There hasn't been an official policy.
Right, that's what I'm getting at.
Right.
So this is brand new.
Right.
I have a question for Mr. Gamble. Has anybody contacted any other municipalities to see what their procedures are?
So I've worked for other municipalities, and this is similar to all others. I mean, the lateral to the main is private property. So typically, going to the residents at the time, I mean, I think our DPW's been very responsive of getting there typically within the hour when they're called. So this is in line with other municipalities.
How closely in line? I guess I'm curious.
Very in line, and I think
As
one
far
thing,
as the residents paying for the service.
so, yeah, I've contacting Ludington, Centerline, and then other municipalities I've worked with. This is when you ask to break the road, you take responsibility for the repair. If it's for private property repair, being the lateral.
Thank you.
So, do you recommend, so I just had a sewer backup last week. I called a contractor. What is your recommendation? If someone has a sewer backup, do you call the city or do you call a contractor first?
It can be either way. If you call the city, we'll ensure that it's not the city's, that there's something in the main that's causing that. So a lot of people do that. A lot of people have repeated issues. They know that they've got roots every 2-3 years. They start having backups or their drains slow down, so they'll routinely call a contractor. And usually if the contractor's there, they look in the manhole as well anyway to make sure that it's a private issue. But I would suggest calling us and letting us verify that we're not causing anything. That way.
That should be the first call.
That would be my recommendation, because if there's a blockage that's causing issues at your house, and it is in the sewer main, the faster we get there and address that, it prevents other people upstream from having the same issue.
So I think we should get education out there too for other people so that a lot of it, I was confused and I'm on council.
Okay.
So.
I've only had one sewer backup, and I called Forbes, and they came out and snaked it out. But that was after a really heavy rain.
Yeah, at least 90% of the time it is on the private lateral. Those laterals are smaller pipes. They've got a lot less flow. So 90% of the time it is a private issue, but that 10% can grow to be a bigger issue if it's not addressed. So.
And on average over the last few years, how many sewer backups has caused this kind of problem where the pavement has to be restored?
Ooh, probably, I would say probably 3, 4, 5 times a year it occurs where they actually have to excavate.
Okay, well, that's not as terrible as I thought it might be.
Yeah, I didn't track that number. We had 4 that did not complete their repairs this past year, but again, that was over a 2-year period because we didn't do paving in '22. But the majority of people and their contractors will fully restore it, and it's simply us taking a ride, looking at it, and then letting the clerk's office know to refund the money. So most of the time, it doesn't get to a point where we have to do the corrective actions.
I have a couple questions. So the first letter that you send out when you go to the house, like I think that we should have something where they initial that and we have a copy of that, keep that copy so they're aware. And then, I don't have my glasses, so I can't read all of this. Is there a part on this first form, thank you, on this first form where it states that if there is an amount owed after the deposit that they'll pay for that?
On the policy or on the initial?
Letter, the initial letter, like I think it needs to be on there and they need to initial that as well, so they're aware of that could happen, like it's not just the $1,000, it might be multiple.
Sure. So down in the bottom of the large paragraph, this deposit will be fully refunded when the customer completes the restoration. If the restoration is not completed, the city will take necessary actions to complete and utilize the deposit to offset the costs. So in bold, the last line is costs which exceed the deposit will be billed to the customer.
Okay, yeah, so I would like them to initial that, and we keep a copy of that, just so we're clear on everything.
Okay.
And then, number 8 with the, is that on this? Okay, so when they're doing the work, like how soon is it when you follow up to see what's been done? Or do you just wait for them to say, hey, it's done? Because I think that's a little disconnect right there.
Yeah, normally either the customer or their contractor will call us to notify us that they're done.
Okay.
Because they want their money back right away.
Okay.
We don't have a set time frame where we go and check up on them, if you will. But we notice usually when they don't complete the work, it's backfilled with gravel and they don't pave it. So usually we don't have a time frame on that. We just kind of track them. Usually after a couple weeks, if it hasn't been paved, they don't intend to pay it. And we never really took a step in the past that reached out to them and said, hey, you haven't done this. We're going to add it to our list. So I think one of the sample letters that I had sent out to Mr. Veach, is that the one?
That's a
Yes.
new proposed one.
So part of this process would be if they ask us to inspect it, or if we notice after a period of time that they haven't completed the repairs, then I'm recommending we send them a letter and note what deficiencies are left. And then that's kind of a reminder, hey, you haven't finished this, and the city's planning on bidding it out and putting it in our package. In the past, a lot of people took the mindset that the city, when we do 40 patches in the city, is gonna get a better price on patching that than just me doing one by myself. And I don't have any problems with that. So they, usually they call in and there's communication about that. But the patches they've gone from $200 a ton. In 2022, when I rejected them, they were $1,000 a ton. So the cost of the asphalt has just gone huge. And a lot of that is because there's more state money into that paving. A lot of the paving contractors are super, super busy and they don't want to deal with little patches. They just want to pave roads, so.
So what if we followed up like 6 weeks after the work is supposed to be started and we follow up and say, hey, this isn't done, or we put something in there to give them a time frame, so like everybody
Yeah,
is,
we could do
everybody's
that.
aware. And I don't know, like if it would be like 30 days, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that.
We could do, I would think a 30-day would be appropriate.
And then I think that if the city ends up having to do the work, that we need to make sure that they get like an estimate of, or a cost of what it's gonna be, and they initial that as well, so they're aware. I mean, I know it's hard to do, but I mean, and then we need to keep constant contact with them to say, hey, you know, this is what it's gonna be, but it's not gonna be done for about 3 to 4 months now.
Yeah, that gets a little more challenging because by the time it hasn't been for only the last couple of years where we've had the dollar amount's been enough where I've got to bring it to city council. Usually when we bid those out and if it's under the 25,000, I need to have a purchasing compliance form signed by the city manager. And then we execute we sign the proposal with the low bidder, and then they come in and get the work done. So if we add a step where we needed to then relay that cost back to the property owner, say it was you, and you see that it's gonna be $3,000 and you go, no way, I don't want you to do it. Well, then we're on the hook making sure that you do it again, because it's important for us to have those done before winter time. So, I'd have to think about that. 'Cause
I think
it'd be
that
challenging.
would make it more important to give a time frame of when it needs to be done, because otherwise you're gonna get stuck with a $4,000-5,000 bill.
Right.
So
I think
Mayor,
it-
you're saying give them a deadline for it
Yes,
almost? Okay.
yes.
Because I think this is a good segue into the existing ordinance we have. And I just want to point this out, but they're supposed to ask permission before digging any or going into the right of way, doing any excavation. They're supposed to first obtain permission from the city council or the city manager. And so that's that form, the road breakage form. The second thing is then they're responsible to put it back in as good a condition as was before. So it puts the onus on them to repair it. And typically, I think, Jeff, you stated the contractor will do that.
Yes.
But then if they don't do it, it puts it, the city will go ahead and do it. And then it does have, city manager may repair the same and charge the expense thereof, making the improvement after. So we're supposed to give a 5-day notice before the repair in writing. And I don't know that that would impact, that's the problem with that language, is I don't know that that would impact anything, just saying that we gave notice that we're gonna do it. But it doesn't say what if they deny, or, so there's a couple issues with this language
So do
here.
we do that currently?
We did not the last time, no.
We haven't, no.
Why don't we follow that? That's part of the ordinance.
I wasn't aware of the 5 days until we looked it up, honestly.
Okay. Can we go back to the draft? I have a question. So number 2 says like employee shall inspect. I guess I'm just wondering because over time we've seen multiple sewer issues or water issues. At what point in time, according to this policy, or maybe it's a practice, but I guess maybe if we're gonna write this out, maybe it should be included in the policy somewhere. At what point in time does it end up going further up to management being aware of something? If it's like a repeated issue, you've been out multiple times, or there's an ongoing problem, at which point does that no longer become an individual employee, but they've consulted with management, or it's gone up the ladder, and now somebody else is responsible to communicate with the homeowner?
So internally right now, when we receive, say somebody calls in with a sewer backup during business hours, Katie will notify Brandon Prince, the DPW lead man. He'll assign the sewer maintenance crew to go look at it. And then they report back and let him know what happened. Normally Brandon will just say, hey, just FYI, we had a backup on this one. It was clear. If there is a backup, Brandon will notify me of that. After hours, I get the call from Central Dispatch and then go through Brandon. So kind of the same process.
I'm just thinking we've had some issues that have went on for a period of time, like several days. at some point in time. So I'm just wondering, at what point does that now become a management thing? Because it's not outlined in the policy.
We haven't had an issue where we've had a blockage in our main for days. Usually we stay there until it's repaired.
Okay.
Are you talking about like a problem with a homeowner
Yeah.
issue? Nothing.
Yeah, I'm thinking homeowner, but sometimes that homeowner has had all their work done and ends up being in the main. It was just further down. So I'm just wondering, at some point, it seems like that should come from management, or management should be notified and reach out to the homeowner and say like what's going on. Even, it's just a system of checks and balances, I guess. I feel like is that employee missing something, or is that homeowner not understanding something? I guess I feel like at some point it should cross management's desk so they're not blindsided by something later on. I guess I think it's a system, like, I guess I agree with the mayor, like, you know, initialing some of these things and getting them to acknowledge they're aware of these things is really good, but then I also feel like at some point management has to get involved if it's an ongoing
What
issue.
should happen is after they check out, and I'm sure that you must do that, is they go back and say, hey, this is what we see down your sewer. I don't know if they do that or not.
They do, they come back to Brandon with that, and then Brandon will update me on it, yeah.
What do you say?
I'm a little more concerned if you've had any issues with people who are unable to pay for it. Repairing the street.
If they didn't do the repair and we billed them, is that what your question is?
Right.
I don't know if we had any issues on that. I know that,
Concerned about maybe the 10 or 12 people who are tax exempt because they just don't make enough money.
you
even
and
pay-
Heather could probably speak to this, but I think back when Heather was the billing clerk and Kelly, then it was Kelly and now it's Kaylee, but I believe that the billing clerk will work with them if they need to do a payment plan or something to assist in that.
I think some insurances will allow for deductible too, if it's, I've heard that, where if you have to do a whole new line or whatever, they,
You do pay extra for that, but I have it on my insurance policy. But I'm not sure that everybody would do that.
Jeff, is there a big difference between if the contractor did the work and if you did the work? Is there, I mean, do you know, like, is that pretty much the same cost, or is it a lot more expensive if you do it, or a lot more expensive if they do it?
I gotta believe it probably costs less if the city puts it in a bigger list. So we've got a contractor in here for 3 days rather than
Right,
coming to do one patch for an hour.
right. So I wonder if it almost would make any sense to offer that to the homeowner? Like, would that make sense? I mean, I don't know, I'm just trying to throw out there the idea of like, if we could do it cheaper, and we didn't have to make the resident pay any more, and they say, okay, we're gonna do this, and you guys are gonna finish it off. Does that seem worse to you? What do you think of that?
I think generally we don't want people digging up the roads in general. I think it adds to an uncertainty about how they're gonna do it, you know, a patch, if it's gonna be an inconsistency in the road. So we don't wanna necessarily encourage them to do that, but when it's necessary, I think it's possible to say it could go to the city, but ultimately our ordinance does put the onus on them to repair it as good a condition.
So who patches the road? Like when they dig up the, is it Forbes that patches it after? Like puts
Or
it
do they
back?
get?
The contractor that does the repair will typically backfill the excavation with sand, put in gravel, and bring it to a level surface with the top of the pavement. But then they need to call a contractor like Reith Riley or Elmer's in order to come and actually then remove that 3 inches of gravel and then pave it back. And I think I understand what your question was, but I think it's cleaner. It's certainly cleaner for us when they do it all themselves and we can just simply give a refund and
Yeah.
then it's over.
So, this might be like a ridiculous question. Couldn't we have something with Reith Riley, Elmer's, for this specific thing? Like if somebody had to dig up their road and we can call them and be like, or the homeowner can call them and.
Problem with, so I work at Reith Riley. Reith Riley I mean, it's like Jeff has said, for small jobs, it's not worth it. You
Okay.
have huge manpower, and just to come out for a little job like that, it costs more for the company to do that than, rather than having a big project, bidding it out, waiting for more projects to do.
Okay.
If the homeowner happens to die before they've paid off the repairs, and that could happen, especially if you're waiting 2 or 3 years for better prices or asphalt or whatever, or it transfers ownership, does that get attached to their tax bill in any way? Can we do that? Or how is that gonna be handled?
No, not for these, we'd probably pursue them in, you think, court, is what?
Yeah, I mean, if the homeowner is deceased and there's a probate estate, you can have a claim against the estate. But, you know, we've talked about this before. The law is that in order to place a lien against a property for something like that, there has to be statutory authority for that, otherwise it's not permitted. Now, that's not to say that some municipalities don't put in their ordinance that I should have a lien for doing this, just like we talked about this with the light before. But unless there's authorization for it, you can't put a lien against the property, and there isn't anything for this particular issue. So if the homeowner died and there was no probate estate and the house ended up going to the family, we'd probably be stuck with that.
How about, is there any way you can attach it to the water bill, the water and sewer bill? That's,
Well,
as an
again,
outstanding debt.
The water and sewer bills, there's a statute on that allows us to lien the property if that's not paid. So attaching it to the water and sewer bill, we still could piggyback on that to get a lien against the property. So, you know, I think that it's probably just a separate bill to the individual homeowner who, you know, is responsible for that. And if they passed away, that would just be something we have to deal with, I guess, in that situation.
Well, in the situation that we talked about with one of the residents, they had already sold the property. So the new owner is unaware that this is a bill and obviously doesn't feel that they're responsible for it. So I still think it could have, if there was some way that it could come out at closing. So if the property
Well,
is
I see
transferred
what you're
ownership.
saying, so that
Yep.
if somebody would investigate it, would they know about it? Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a legitimate thing. If somebody called up, or the title company called up the city and said, is there an outstanding water bill, and this was added to it. But I don't see a way to do that.
Okay,
It's a good idea, though.
thanks.
I appreciate seeing parts in there where you're gonna make sure that you're communicating and it's part of your steps and things like that, because I think that's where we got a little stuck with this last one, is we didn't seem like there was the best communication on both sides maybe, but, so I appreciate that you're putting those steps in there. I think that's a good thing.
We're trying to make it so that there's always unique situations, there's always anomalies. We're trying to add a couple correspondence points in here
Yeah.
where it's hard not to know what the rules are.
Yeah.
So could we add this to our city page and our social media page, so it's out there?
Mhm.
And then is there I know you said that there was some people could do a payment plan. Do you know like what that is, like timeframe wise?
Heather, do you have any information on that? I know that I've heard the billing clerk say,
For a payment
we're
plan?
trying to work on a payment plan with them, and
I know that they will work with people. If there
Okay.
is a bill, they will,
Okay.
they will break it down into a payment plan. They've done that as long as they're making regular payments. That's something that definitely they will do.
I think it's also important to point out, we don't put any markup on this whatsoever. It is purely what we pay out, what a contractor charges us. We don't put any markup on it, we don't put any of our time on it. It's just simply a pass-through.
Okay. Yeah, I would just like them to initial that first letter, just so everybody's aware.
Yeah, Mr. Gamble suggested the same thing when we met this afternoon, so
Okay.
we can do that.
Jeff, for the people who don't know, can they borrow the horses from the city garage to put around that hole so something doesn't happen?
For public safety, I would say yes. Most of the contractors have their own, but yeah, we'll loan them out if it's in a city street or city infrastructure.
'Cause I've seen holes that didn't have anything around, so, okay.
Yeah, and most of the contractors are really good about it. There's one that just doesn't get involved with the paving. They just don't want to get in part of that. Most of the other ones have something like you guys suggested. They've got a relationship with Reith Riley or Elmer's or Ron Brown and Sons. And so they just call up and say, hey, I've got a 6x6 over on Second Street. When you guys are in town, can you just swing by and do it? And most of these go extremely smooth and we don't have issues. We actually had a very interesting one yesterday where a backup occurred. It didn't back up in the house, but the line was backed up, came out of clean out, and was running down a sidewalk. And they couldn't get a contractor in for a day and a half. So we actually had to shut the water off to the house to prevent any more of that public hazard. So there's just always really weird, unique situations.
I got a question for George. Is there a problem with putting on that first letter? Is there an issue if we put on like 3 or 4 different contractors, the names and numbers of them? Because we're not doing just one, we're doing multiple, so would that be an issue?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, it's, you're kind of concerned about appearing to recommend
Yeah.
somebody, and if there's other contractors, I guess if you told contractors, and all contractors, that you would put their name on there if they were interested, and make it available to all contractors, I think you could, as long as it isn't the city selecting specific
Right.
contractors and providing that information.
Okay,
Most of the first step for a customer is it's a blockage in their pipe and they don't have to actually excavate it to do a repair. It's cleaning roots out or a ball of toilet paper or something. And usually when they route that line out, they're okay. When it becomes necessary to dig, it's where the contractor believes there's a physical break in the pipe, or a collapse section of it or something like that, where they need to physically get down and repair that pipe. So, and those are normally 2 different contractors that do that work.
okay. Anybody else?
I appreciate you guys' work on that.
Thank you. Okay. There, losing my voice. Mr. Pratt,
I don't have anything.
Mr. Kowalski. What?
No.
Speaking.
No,
This one. Throw me off today.
Sorry.
I forgot you, Bill. I was gonna start with you. I'm sorry.
Nothing today, thank you.
Okay.
I'm good.
I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.